Welcome back to another episode of Space News with me. We have big progress with SpaceX's Starship as Ship 28 stands at the pad ready for possible static fire testing. Major testing took place at the recently constructed SpaceX Crew Access facilities at Launch Complex 40, and 3 Falcon 9 launches took place. Beyond SpaceX, NASA continued with booster processing work for Artemis II and upgraded engine testing for Artemis V, and Intuitive Machines made a part successful, part unsuccessful landing on the Lunar South Pole. All of this and a whole lot more. Enjoy, and let's kick things off. We left things off in last week's Starship update with the destack of Ship 28 from Booster 10, after which it was then transported down to the suborbital launch pad for potential static fire testing. Once arrived, it was connected to a crane via the 2-point lifter, which is designed to grab starships in a similar way to the chopsticks, meaning no need for grab points on the nose cone. NASASpaceFlight's Starbase livestream captured the moment of lift, and then Boca Chica Gal captured this excellent shot of the vehicle being placed on the stand. So far, that's where things are left with Ship 28. We're not completely certain what will be done at the test stand from here, whether it's just for checkups, static fire or cryo testing, or just for temporary storage. One thing we did see was the addition of new decals at the ship's nose cone, now proudly reading S28. All of this, of course, left Booster 10 standing alone at the launch pad. We're not sure why the ship was removed before a successful wet dress rehearsal was completed, but there may have been some anomalies discovered that required further work. Perhaps with the booster quick disconnect, as workers were seen working on the mechanism that supplies the booster with electricity and propellant, which is designed to quickly retract and deploy a cover during a launch. This cover protects the quick disconnect's interface, and Starbase Live caught it being tested in this clip here. As night drew in, it was reopened, but then shortly after, it was closed once again. Not long after this, it was then the turn of Booster 10 to move into action. Or the opposite of move into action, maybe? I say this because the chopsticks lifted the massive vehicle off the launch pad and lowered it alongside. In the background of this shot, you can see the pad access crew platform being raised to give workers better access to the innards of the launch ring. Not long afterwards, Booster 10 departed the scene and was rolled all the way back to the launch area before it was steered into the mega bay, where it was then lifted onto a work stand. So, when Flight 3 then? Well, despite the rollback, it's hopefully sooner rather than later. I say this because here you can see a worker carrying explosives to the launch pad bunker. These are used for the flight termination system of the rocket, i.e. the self-destruct function, which is the very last system that's installed before launch, and so SpaceX wouldn't want them at the launch pad unless they knew they were very close to flight. Boca Chica Gal captured the arrival of yet more second launch tower segments being shipped from the Kennedy Space Center to the port of Brownsville. Once they arrive at port, they'll be trucked down to Starbase for eventual installation, and seeing 2 towers side by side will certainly be a sight to behold. And perhaps once SpaceX have the redundancy of a second tower, they can start to seriously think about starting catch tests with the chopsticks, depending on how far down the line they are with Starship testing at that point, which will hopefully be significant. After all, SpaceX recently put in a request with the FAA to conduct a whopping 9 orbital test flights in 2024 alone, and since we won't get one until at least March, that almost works out to 1 launch per month. Exciting times. The second launch tower will be constructed at a site currently occupied by a parking lot located just behind the Gateway to Mars sign, and crews have already begun tearing up this area to make way for the tower's construction. With the new Starbase tower being the talk of the town, it's easy to forget the recently constructed tower at Cape Canaveral Launch Complex 40, which will allow SpaceX to launch Crew Dragon from here. We saw pretty major progress with testing last week with this. On Tuesday, the crew access arm's swing mechanism was tested. This arm, of course, is the bridge that crews will walk across to get on board the Dragon crew capsule, and once aboard, the whole thing needs to then be able to swing out of the way of the rocket itself by rotating away. It wasn't just the crew arm that was tested though. We recently saw the installation of the crew emergency egress basket, which underwent testing last week. The emergency egress basket is what the name suggests. In the event where the crew are at the top of the tower or the rocket, but need to quickly evacuate due to an anomaly, they can hop aboard this gondola-type basket, which then zip-lines them down to the ground and away from the launch vehicle. From here, there would then be a ground vehicle to escort them further to safety. While obviously the situation would be terrifying if you actually needed to use this as intended, during testing it actually looks pretty fun. I like how we have this point of view shot inside the cradle as it descends. SpaceX's Falcon 9 was no slouch last week. In fact, we saw 3 orbital launches over the past 7 days. Things began on Tuesday with the launch of the Telkomsat Merah 2, which was carried to geosynchronous orbit. The Falcon launched from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral, and shortly after stage separation, the Falcon's first stage landed on the Just Read the Instructions drone ship in the Atlantic Ocean, completing its 17th mission overall. The satellite itself is an Indonesian high-throughput communication satellite built to replace the Nusantara II satellite, which was destroyed when the Chinese Long March 3B rocket carrying it failed to reach orbit. 3 days later, on Friday, another Falcon 9 lifted off, this time from the Vandenberg Space Launch Complex. This was a fairly standard-to-see Starlink V2 launch, with the Falcon carrying 22 satellites to Starlink Shell 7 in low Earth orbit. The first stage of the rocket successfully landed on the drone ship Of Course I Still Love You in the Pacific Ocean, wrapping up its 19th overall flight. We're getting really close to hitting the big 20 mark with this one. The third and final Falcon of the week took off yesterday, so Sunday, and was another Starlink V2 launch. This time though, the rocket carried 24 satellites from Cape Canaveral Launch Complex 40. Usually the Falcon is limited to 23 satellites when launching from the East Coast, so it looks like SpaceX have managed to squeeze an extra nugget into the stack. We don't really have any concrete info other than a tweet from SpaceX stating that the extra satellite was possible due to performance increases on Falcon 9, but not a whole lot of other info. Whatever they did, it didn't stop the first stage from having enough fuel left at stage separation to perform a boost back and landing burn, successfully coming to rest on the A Shortfall of Gravitas drone ship in the Atlantic Ocean, wrapping up its 13th overall mission. A great milestone to break past for the superstitious among you. NASA is continuing with their testing of Aerojet Rocketdyne's upgraded RS-25 engines, which they hope to enter service as the main engines for the SLS rocket for Artemis V. We saw another hot fire test at the Stennis Space Center last week on Friday, which was the 7th of the planned total of 12 hot fire tests in this, the final round of certification testing ahead of production of the upgraded engines. This particular hot fire lasted 550 seconds, with the engine running at up to 113% power level, which is more than the SLS rocket will actually require, but you know, margins for error and all that. Speaking of the SLS, NASA has shared some new footage of booster processing for Artemis II, specifically its massive solid rocket boosters. In this clip, we can see the lifting of major componentry to the aft portion of one of the solid rocket boosters, with crews working diligently on the structure. And in this clip, well, I mean, it should be fairly self-explanatory, but the iconic red worm logo has now been painted onto the side of the booster, though this clip also highlights that the booster is not yet fully stacked. We still have a ways to go before the planned launch date for Artemis II though, so we still have plenty of time for this. In last Monday's episode of Space This Week, we covered the launch and deployment of Intuitive Machines' Odysseus Nova C lunar lander. Over the following few days, we were able to follow its journey to the moon, with the vehicle capturing its first images on Wednesday the 21st as it prepared for landing the next day. Unfortunately, there was no live feed of the onboard cameras during the lunar descent, which, I mean, is fair enough. It's difficult to stream back that much data from all the way out there, but the live stream hosted by NASA TV eventually announced that the lander had successfully touched down near the Malapert A crater in the moon's south polar region at 23:24 UTC, the first American lunar soft landing in over 50 years. Unfortunately, it later transpired that while the lander's systems appeared to be functioning well, it was, in fact, on its side, the prevailing theory being that one of the landing legs had clipped an object on the surface, causing the lander to flip. Sadly, some of the lander's antennas are therefore not pointing towards Earth and therefore can't transmit the bulk of the mission data. So far, we've also not yet seen the deployment of the Eagle Cam, which is a small camera that will eject from the lander to take images of the landing. Since it's not deployed yet, we obviously didn't get any third-person views of the landing or the lander at all so far, but teams believe that it should still be able to eject later on in the mission to give us our first look at the lander. I imagine I'll have more to cover with this story in next Monday's episode, so make sure you're subscribed so that you don't miss it. And hey, if you're enjoying the video so far, a little like down below always helps me out. Anyway, on Friday, we saw the launch of a Chinese Long March 5 rocket, which carried the TJS-11 satellite to geosynchronous Earth orbit from the Wenchang Spacecraft Launch Center in China's Hainan province. This satellite is a technology test platform, and official sources have stated that its mission will be running multi-band and high-speed communication technology experiments. Lowne Aerospace had another busy week last week, as Saturday marked the 1-year anniversary of Kerbal Kerbal Space Program 2's public release, and I think we all remember it being a slightly rocky ride. And so, 1 year on, I wanted to see how it feels to go back and play the release day version, and then compare it to the latest release by launching an Apollo-style Mun mission in KSP then, and then in KSP now. We lived, we laughed, we lagged. And so if that sounds like a fun time for you, then it should now be one of the clickable cards on screen. If you want to support what I do here, then I have a Patreon you can join, just like these names on the left did, and I hope you enjoyed today's installment of Space This Week. I'm aiming to release another KSP2 Exploration Mode walkthrough this weekend, so get hyped for that. But yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.